In the official records of the Spanish crown, 13 of its most powerful warships are listed simply as lost without trace. But what the state archives fail to mention is the impossible nature of their vanishing. They were not lost to a hurricane, nor were they defeated in a great naval battle. They disappeared from a sea that was as flat and lifeless as polished slate, under a sky the color of a fading bruise, pulled into the depths without a single splintered mast or a cry for help. For over 500 years, this event was a carefully guarded secret, a chilling maritime anomaly that defied all known laws of the ocean. It is the story of an invisible boundary, and the day the abyss itself decided to reclaim its own. If you believe that the darkest corners of our map still hold ancient territorial powers, then you have found your port of call. Let us know in the comments from which coastline or country you are joining this expedition. And to ensure you do not miss our next voyage into the forbidden chapters of maritime history, subscribe to our channel and become part of the crew that dares to chart the unknown. Then, from the lightless depths, a low, guttural thrum began to rise. It was a vibration felt more in the bones, a deep resonance that seemed to travel through the very timbers of the ship, up through the soles of their boots, and into the chests of every terrified sailor. The water around La Invencible, and indeed around every single vessel in the proud Armada, began to swell, not in the familiar rhythmic undulations of waves, but in vast oily domes, forming perfectly smooth, impossible bulges, as if something colossal, something impossibly vast was stirring, breathing ponderously beneath the placid surface. Rodrigo de Vega, his voice raw with a sudden, primal dread, bellowed orders, his words swallowed by the oppressive quiet. But the sails hung limp, the oars useless, caught in the sudden, invisible currents. The ships, drawn by an unseen, irresistible force, began to drift inward, inexorably towards the epicenter of the swelling. The last thing any living soul aboard La Invencible ever saw was the water, no longer swelling, but drawing inward, a vast, silent maw forming beneath the proud Armada, followed by a dull, resonant thud that echoed not through the air, but through the very keels of their ships. And then, without a single cry, without a splintered mast or a torn sail, without even a ripple left on the sea's surface, all 13 ships of the Royal Armada of Castile simply vanished. What ancient horror, what forgotten boundary did they trespass upon that day, swallowed whole by the seemingly placid depths? The Cantabrian Sea, in the twilight of the 15th century, was a realm of both bounty and profound peril. Its rugged coast, a sentinel of granite and ancient oak, had witnessed the ebb and flow of empires, the rise and fall of kingdoms. But in the late summer of 1498, it bore witness to something far stranger, something that defied all known maritime lore and left a scar of silence on the historical record. The Royal Armada of Castile, 13 vessels strong, was not merely a fleet. It was a testament to Spain's burgeoning power, a moving fortress intended to patrol trade routes and deter corsairs. Led by La Invencible, a carrack of formidable size, captained by the aforementioned Rodrigo de Vega, a man whose very name was synonymous with unflinching resolve. This armada was considered unsinkable, a floating bastion of Castilian might. Their mission was routine, a sweep of the northern waters, a show of force, a brief transit to the shipyards of Ferrol for refitting. Yet the sea, that ancient, fickle mistress, had other plans. The morning of their disappearance began not with storm or squall, but with an unnatural, oppressive calm. Naval records, unearthed from the dusty archives of Seville, speak of a dead calm, such as had not been witnessed in living memory. The air grew heavy, thick and still, devoid of the usual salty tang, replaced by a strange, almost metallic scent, like old copper or distant damp earth. The sun, usually a benevolent disk, hung in the sky like a jaundiced eye, casting no warmth, only an indifferent, sickly light. Aboard La Invencible, the seasoned crew, accustomed to the boisterous symphony of wind and wave, grew uneasy. The rhythmic creak of timbers, usually a comforting lullaby, now seemed amplified, a mournful groan in the profound silence. Seabirds, those ubiquitous companions of any voyage, had vanished. Not a single gull circled overhead. Not a distant cry broke the stillness. It was as if the very air had been vacuum sealed, the world holding its breath. Captain de Vega, a man of practical mind and iron nerves, paced his quarterdeck. His eyes, usually sharp and discerning, now held a flicker of something akin to apprehension. He had faced hurricanes that tore ships apart, battles that turned the sea red, but this unnatural quiet gnawed at him. "The sea has gone to sleep," he muttered to his first mate, a grizzled Andalusian named Esteban. "But it is not a peaceful slumber. I feel it in my bones. It is the stillness of a predator, waiting." Esteban, a man of few words but deep superstitions, merely nodded, his gaze sweeping the glassy, unmoving expanse. He thought of the old wives' tales, the whispered warnings of fishermen who spoke of certain forbidden waters, places marked on no charts, where the very fabric of the ocean could shift. The monastic chronicles from the remote monasteries along the Cantabrian coast, records painstakingly copied by lamplight, speak of this day with a chilling brevity. They reference ancient legends of a concept known only as Linia Altaqua, a boundary not visible, not charted by man, but woven into the very deep, a line not to be crossed without permission, lest the deep reclaim its own. Did the Armada de San Miguel, in its hubris or ignorance, stray across this forgotten threshold? The first physical manifestation of the impending horror was subtle, almost imperceptible, a low thrum, a vibration that resonated through the ship's hulls, not from the air, but from the very water itself. It was a sound too deep for the ear to truly register, a feeling of immense internal pressure. Then, the water around the Armada began to behave strangely. Vast, perfectly smooth domes began to rise, not in waves, but like immense oily bruises on the sea's surface. They would bulge, then subside, only to rise again in another spot, as if some colossal, unseen lung was breathing ponderously beneath them. The ships, 13 proud vessels, were no longer adrift. They were being drawn inward, slowly but inexorably, towards the heart of this impossible, silent upheaval. Captain de Vega shouted, his voice a raw rasp, but no sail filled, no oar could fight the unseen current. The Armada, a fleet of giants, was being pulled towards a silent, gathering vortex. As the vessels were drawn closer, the strange phenomena intensified. The colossal bulges on the water's surface grew higher, more pronounced, their oily sheen reflecting the sickly sky in distorted, nightmarish patterns. It was as if the sea itself was suffering from some internal, monstrous convulsion. The low thrumming vibrated through the very decks, shaking the teeth in the sailors' heads, turning their courage to a cold, liquid dread. Men, hardened by years of battling the sea's fury, now stood frozen, their eyes wide with an incomprehensible terror. This was not a storm, not a rogue wave, not any peril they had ever been taught to combat. This was something else, something primal and indifferent, a force that seemed to operate on a scale beyond human understanding. Aboard La Invencible, the ship's carpenter, a burly man named Mateo, stumbled back from the rail, his face ashen. "Captain," he stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. "The timbers, they moan as if they are being squeezed." Indeed, a deep, resonant groaning, distinct from the usual working of a ship, began to emanate from beneath the decks, a sound of immense pressure, of wood under an unbearable, unseen strain. It was the sound of a ship being compressed from within, its very structure protesting against an unimaginable force. From the other ships in the Armada, muffled shouts and desperate cries began to carry across the unnaturally still water, quickly dissolving into panicked screams. The distances between the vessels, once measured in cables, were now shrinking with alarming speed. The ships were not just drifting, they were being pulled into a central point, as if by a colossal, invisible hand. The water in the center of this gathering horror began to darken further, coalescing into an inky blackness that seemed to drink the light, a void against the bruised gray of the sea. It began to swirl slowly at first, Then with increasing, deliberate speed, like a monstrous drain opening into the abyss, Captain de Vega, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his cutlass, felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This was no act of God, no natural phenomenon. This was a presence. He had always dismissed the old legends, the fishermen's tales of the Linia Altaqua, that mythical boundary beyond which the sea turned hostile. But now, he looked at the swirling vortex, at the impossible, silent bulges, and a horrifying truth began to dawn. They had crossed something. They had disturbed something ancient and titanic. The monastic chronicles, those cryptic records from the isolated cloisters dotting the Spanish coast, offer a chilling, if poetic, description of the final moments. One entry from the monastery of San Juan de la Peña, dated to the year of the disappearance, speaks of the sea opening its silent mouth, not to consume, but to reclaim. It describes a deep root, an ancient primordial entity that had slumbered beneath the Cantabrian for millennia, its territory marked by an invisible boundary. The Armada, in its passage, had unknowingly violated this sacred, forgotten space. A chilling account, attributed to a surviving fisherman, one Gaspar of Muros, who claimed to have been fishing miles away yet felt the distant tremor, describes seeing the water swell from within as if a mountain breathed, followed by a dull thud, not of thunder, but of earth itself groaning. This Gaspar, in a later, desperate letter to a priest, spoke of the sea swallowing its own reflection. As the ships were drawn closer to the dark, swirling heart of the anomaly, the compression intensified. The groaning of the timbers became a continuous, high-pitched shriek. The very air vibrated with an unseen force. The water, now a vast, concave depression, began to draw the vessels down, not with the violence of a whirlpool, but with a terrifying, inexorable pull, as if the sea itself was absorbing them into its very being. The sails, still hanging limp, were sucked downwards, their canvas disappearing beneath the surface without even a ripple. The men, their screams now choked by the overwhelming pressure, watched as the decks of their proud ships began to buckle, their masts bending, threatening to snap. This was not an attack. It was an absorption, a vast, silent reclamation. The colossal, inverted maw of the sea tightened its grip. The grand vessels, La Invincible, and her 12 sister ships were now caught in an inescapable embrace. The deep, resonant groaning from beneath their hulls intensified, a sound of wood and iron yielding to an unimaginable, crushing force. It was not the shriek of a ship tearing apart in a storm, but the slow, agonizing protest of a living thing being suffocated. Masts, once proud sentinels against the sky, bowed inward, their mighty timbers groaning like tortured giants. Decks buckled, and the very keels of the ships, their spines, began to curve under the immense unseen pressure. Panic, raw and unadulterated, swept through the remaining crew, but their cries were swallowed, muted by the oppressive stillness of the air, by the overwhelming presence of the force that consumed them. They watched, frozen in a tableau of existential dread as the dark, swirling water rose up their ship's sides, not in a rush, but with a terrifying, deliberate slowness, like an insatiable appetite being sated. The last glimpse of any man, from the terrified cabin boy to the unyielding Captain de Vega, would have been the inky blackness enveloping their vessel, the light from the sky dimming, then vanishing entirely. And then, as the last splinter of La Invincible mainmast disappeared beneath the surface, a single, profound sound echoed across the now perfectly calm sea, a dull, resonant thud. It was a sound that seemed to emanate not from the impact of wood on water, but from the very core of the earth, a sound of immense final closure. Then, nothing. The sea, moments before a scene of impossible horror, returned to its glassy, indifferent calm. Not a single ripple, not a floating plank, not a life preserver. Just a vast, empty expanse of leaden water reflecting the bruised sky. News of the Armada's disappearance, initially dismissed as rumor, then as a fanciful tale, soon reached the Castilian court. Naval expeditions were immediately dispatched, scouring the Cantabrian coast for any sign of wreckage, any survivor, any clue. But the search yielded nothing. No debris field, no scattered cargo, no bodies washed ashore. It was as if the 13 ships and every soul aboard them had been simply erased from existence. This lack of conventional wreckage was, in itself, a profound mystery, deepening the enigma of their vanishing. However, weeks later, in isolated coves far to the west, where the current spun in strange eddies, a few fragments did eventually wash ashore. But these were not the expected splintered timbers or torn canvas of a shipwreck. Instead, they were disturbing anomalies. A piece of an oak hull, usually thick and resilient, was found severely compressed, its fibers flattened as if squeezed by an impossibly powerful vice. A section of a mast, not broken, but crushed inwards, its core almost pulverized. Even a few pieces of the ship's bronze fittings were found bent and contorted, not from impact, but from uniform, immense pressure. This was not the work of a storm, stated Dr. Alistair Thorne, a renowned maritime historian from Oxford, in a recently declassified Admiralty report from 1903 that re-examined the Castilian Armada incident. Nor was it a collision. The evidence points to an event of colossal internal compression, as if the very water itself became a crushing hand. The local fishermen, the true chroniclers of the Cantabrian, had a simpler, far more terrifying explanation. They spoke of the absorption, of the sea reclaiming its own. They whispered that the Armada had not sunk. It had been drawn into the ancient living heart of the abyss, reclaimed by something that saw their passage not as an invasion, but as a return to its primordial territory. The Linia Altaqua, the invisible boundary, had been trespassed, and the deep had merely closed. The silence that followed the Armada's vanishing was heavy, pregnant with unanswered questions. For generations, the incident became a cautionary tale, whispered by fishermen along the Cantabrian coast, a chilling reminder of the sea's inscrutable power. The official records, sparse as they were, simply listed the Armada as lost without trace, a polite euphemism for a mystery too profound to comprehend. Yet, the few fragments of wreckage that did wash ashore, those unnaturally compressed timbers and bent bronze fittings, continued to haunt the minds of those who examined them. They spoke of a force beyond the fury of any storm, beyond the impact of any reef. Centuries later, the advent of deep-sea exploration and advanced sonar technology offered a tantalizing, if terrifying, possibility. Could the wreck of La Invincible and her sister ships finally be found? Could the abyss finally yield its secrets? Multiple expeditions were launched, funded by private ventures and even, covertly, by the Spanish Navy, driven by a desire to bring closure to this enduring historical wound. One such expedition in 1987, led by the renowned oceanographer Dr. Elena Ramirez from the University of Santiago de Compostela, focused its sonar arrays on the precise coordinates where the Armada was last seen, an area long avoided by local fishermen. Their initial scans revealed nothing but a smooth, featureless seabed, no distinct shipwrecks, no large metallic signatures. It was as if the ships had never existed. Dr. Ramirez, a woman of science, was initially frustrated, dismissing the old tales as mere superstition. Yet a persistent anomaly kept appearing on their most sensitive long-range sonar, a vast, indistinct signature deep beneath the seabed, a massive, organic-looking structure that defied classification. It was too large to be a geological formation, too uniform to be a natural cavern. It pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, on the readouts. Her team, seasoned by years of mapping the ocean floor, had never seen anything like it. Further attempts to penetrate this anomaly with more powerful sonar arrays yielded only fragmented, distorted images. They showed colossal, smooth surfaces, vast curves, and what appeared to be immense repeating patterns, almost like scales, but on a scale that dwarfed any known creature. The images were fleeting, as if the anomaly itself resisted being fully revealed, shimmering and dissolving on the screen like a bad dream. It was as if the sonar waves themselves were being absorbed, their energy dissipated by something vast and profoundly alien. One night, while attempting a particularly deep scan, the ship's entire sonar system inexplicably shut down. The lights flickered, and a low, almost sub-audible hum filled the bridge, a vibration that felt strangely familiar to the old accounts of the Armada's vanishing. Dr. Ramirez, shaken by the inexplicable malfunction, reported a faint, musky odor permeating the air like ancient disturbed earth and something like ozone. When the system finally rebooted, the anomaly was gone from their screens. It had simply vanished, leaving behind only the featureless seabed. The team packed up, their mission officially a failure, yet privately, Dr. Ramirez carried a chilling conviction. The ships weren't on the seabed. They were within something. The anomaly was not a geological feature. It was a living, breathing entity, one of impossible scale, its very presence capable of distorting technology. This creature, this deep root of the Cantabrian, had not just swallowed the Armada. It had absorbed it, integrated it into its colossal living form. The wreckage that washed ashore centuries ago wasn't ejected. It was discarded, the indigestible remnants of a monumental meal. The idea of the Linia Altaqua began to shed its mythical veil and assume a terrifying biological reality. If you find yourself drawn into the abyssal mysteries we explore, if the chill of the deep calls to you, then consider becoming a part of our crew. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us brave the uncharted waters of history and uncover more forgotten tales from the maritime unknown. The spectral sonar readings, the hushed accounts of compressed wreckage, and the chilling silence that followed the Armada's vanishing all point to a truth far more ancient and terrifying than any storm or hidden reef. They speak of a creature, a leviathan of impossible scale, whose very existence defies the rational world. For centuries, the tales of the Kraken have permeated the maritime consciousness, a monstrous cephalopod of the frigid northern seas, its colossal tentacles capable of dragging down the mightiest ships. But what if the Kraken, in its myriad forms, is not merely a Scandinavian myth, but a universal terror, adapted to the specific, terrifying characteristics of each abyssal domain? Off the coast of Spain, in the deep troughs of the Cantabrian, the old legends speak not of a kraken of writhing arms, but of something more primal, more elemental. The local Basque and Asturian fishermen, their folklore steeped in the raw power of the sea, whisper of the Marea Negra, the black tide, a vast conscious darkness that sleeps beneath the waves, its movements causing subtle shifts in currents, its presence felt as a profound, chilling stillness. This is no creature of tentacle and eye in the conventional sense, but a living, undulating landmass, a colossal organism whose very being is inextricably linked to the seabed itself. Its arms are not independent limbs, but vast fleshy bulges of its own immense body, capable of creating the impossible, oily swells that swallowed the Armada. An ancient fragmented scroll, discovered in the crumbling library of a Benedictine monastery in Galicia in the late 19th century, and now housed in a private collection, offers a chilling corroboration. Penned in archaic Latin and a dialect of Old Galician, it describes a beast of the deep, without form or discernible limb, whose breath is the calm before the swallowing, and whose hunger is the very silence of the sea. It speaks of ships not broken, but folded inwards, as if by the pressure of a god's thumb. This text, attributed to a reclusive monk named Father Anselmo, who lived in the 12th century, detailed a similar incident where 3 trading cogs simply melted into the water during a period of unseasonable calm. Father Anselmo hypothesized that these were not acts of divine wrath, but the reclaiming of territory by the oldest dweller, a creature whose existence predated the very mountains. Dr. Alvaro Delgado, a contemporary marine biologist specializing in deep-sea gigantism, postulates that the Kraken of the Cantabrian could be a form of colossal, sessile life form, perhaps an ancient, slow-moving organism that has evolved to mimic geological features. Imagine, he muses in a recently published paper, a creature so vast that its internal processes create localized shifts in water pressure, generating those inexplicable swells and subsequent compression. Its skin or surface would be incredibly tough, perhaps even able to absorb sonar waves, making it effectively invisible to our technology. The wreckage, he suggests, was not crushed by external force, but by the creature's immense internal pressure as it ingested the vessels. The debris then expelled as indigestible waste. The Linia Altaqua, mentioned in the monastic chronicles, takes on a new, more sinister meaning in this context. It is not merely a mythical line on a map. It is the perceived boundary of this colossal entity's domain, a territory it has silently claimed for eons. The Royal Armada of Castile, in its blind ambition, had not merely sailed across a line, it had sailed directly onto the living, breathing surface of the Marea Negra itself, unaware that the placid water beneath their proud keels was, in fact, the colossal, slumbering form of an ancient god. The incident was not a malicious attack, but a territorial assertion, a vast, silent absorption, as if the creature was merely yawning, and the ships were unfortunate dust motes drawn into its colossal maw. If these chronicles of the deep stir a primal awe within you, if the whispers of forgotten horrors and the chilling expanse of the unknown captivate your mind, then join our voyage into the abyss. Like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support is the wind in our sails, guiding us deeper into the uncharted mysteries of the maritime world. The chilling silence that swallowed the Royal Armada of Castile was not merely the absence of sound, it was the echoing void of an ancient, primordial power. The disappearance of 13 ships in a dead calm, leaving behind only the unnerving evidence of impossible compression, forced the Castilian court to confront a terrifying proposition. The sea in this forgotten corner of the world was not merely a vast body of water, but a conscious, territorial entity. Yet for the indigenous peoples of the Cantabrian coast, the Basques, the Asturians, the Galicians, this was no revelation. It was an ancestral memory, a truth older than parchment, whispered through generations around hearth fires and in the shadow of mist-shrouded peaks. Long before the caravel and the carrack plied these waters, before the cross supplanted the ancient symbols, these cultures held a profound reverence and a deep-seated fear for the lure, the land, and the water, as living, intertwined forces. Their myths spoke not of the conventional monsters of the deep, but of colossal, earthbound spirits, guardians of sacred thresholds. The Linia Altaqua, that invisible boundary mentioned in the monastic chronicles, finds its true roots in these pre-Christian beliefs. It was understood not as a line drawn by man, but as the very edge of a slumbering primordial consciousness, a place where the deep earth and the deep sea converged in a single, vast, living being. For the ancient Basques, the concept of Mari, the supreme deity of nature, often dwelling in caves high in the mountains, but intrinsically linked to the fertility and power of the earth, held a parallel in the sea. Some anthropological studies, compiled from fragmented oral traditions and newly deciphered rock carvings found in coastal caves, speak of a Mari of the depths, a counterpart to the mountain goddess, whose form was not fixed but fluid, encompassing the very substance of the ocean floor. This entity was less a creature of malice and more a force of nature, asserting its dominion, a vast geological being whose waking could redraw the very contours of the seabed. The dull thud felt by the distant fishermen was not the impact of ships, but the sound of this colossal entity settling back into its ageless slumber, its territory re-secured. Dr. Isolde Brandt, a leading expert in Iberian ethnography from the University of Lisbon, recently published an analysis of these fragmented myths, suggesting the Armada's fate was seen as a cosmic correction. These aren't simply Kraken stories, Dr. Brandt posits. This is the fear of the terra incognita, literally consuming the navis incognita. The ships, in their very act of exploration and assertion, violated an ancient, deeply held belief system about the sea as a living, sacred space. The Marea Negra is not just a monster. It is the manifestation of the ocean's collective, ancient will, a geological consciousness that simply absorbed what it deemed an intrusion. The psychological impact on the coastal communities was profound and lasting. Unlike a storm, which leaves wreckage and a testament to the sea's fury, the silent, complete vanishing left no catharsis, only an unnerving void. This absolute absence fueled the myths, granting them an enduring power. How could something so vast, so powerful, simply vanish? The human mind, confronted with such an inexplicable event, instinctively reaches for explanations that transcend the mundane. The deep root of the Armada's disappearance, therefore, lies not just in a biological anomaly, but in the deepest, most primal fears embedded in the human psyche. The fear of the unknown, of the immense, indifferent power of nature, and of being utterly consumed without a trace, leaving no story, no echo behind. The Cantabrian Sea, in its placid moments, still holds this terrifying memory, a testament to the fact that some parts of our world are not meant to be charted, not meant to be crossed, unless the ancient guardians of the abyss grant their silent, chilling permission. The true horror of the Cantabrian Armada's vanishing lies not just in the loss of life and ships, but in the absolute, almost surgical nature of their disappearance. This wasn't a violent shipwreck, it was an absorption, a reclamation. The evidence of extreme, uniform compression on the few pieces of wreckage that ever surfaced suggests a force unlike any known to human science. This leads us to consider not just a monstrous creature, but a rare, perhaps unique, natural phenomenon, one so profound it could blur the lines between geology, biology, and the very physics of the ocean. One compelling scientific hypothesis posits the existence of massive localized high-doprise hydrothermal vents, or siesens, cold seeps, in the deep Cantabrian Trough. While typically associated with volcanic activity or tectonic plate boundaries, some theories suggest that in geologically stable regions, immense pockets of gas, primarily methane, could accumulate beneath the seabed. These pockets, under extreme pressure, could then be suddenly released. Imagine, proposes Dr. Julian Voss, a geophysicist from the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research Kiel, a colossal subterranean gas bubble growing for centuries. Its sudden eruption could create a temporary, localized vacuum or a massive downward pulling current, a negative wave, if you will, capable of drawing down anything on the surface with incredible force. This sudden release of gas would not necessarily create a violent explosion on the surface. Instead, the immense volume of escaping gas, suddenly expanding as it rises, could create a vast, transient depression in the water, a massive, inverted dome that would suck everything on the surface into its void. The dull thud, reported by distant fishermen, could be the sound of this massive gas pocket collapsing, or the implosion of the water filling the sudden void. The subsequent compression of the ships would be a natural consequence of the immense hydrostatic pressure as they were rapidly pulled into the depths, followed by the rapid re-equalization of the water, crushing them before the pressure dispersed. Furthermore, the oily swells, described by the crew of La Invincible, could be the visual manifestation of gas hydrates, ice-like structures formed from methane and water under high pressure and low temperature, dissociating as the gas pocket destabilizes. As these hydrates melt, they release methane gas, which would create an oily, disturbed appearance on the surface, perfectly matching the historical accounts. The metallic, earthy smell could be the release of various trace elements and gases from deep within the seabed, brought to the surface by the escaping methane. Another, more controversial theory involves the concept of rogue internal waves. Unlike surface waves, internal waves occur between layers of water of different densities, often at great depths. While usually harmless, in specific rare conditions, particularly over complex seabed topography like the Cantabrian Trough, These internal waves could theoretically amplify to colossal proportions. A soliton, a solitary wave that maintains its shape while propagating, could potentially create a massive downward-moving vortex of immense power. Such a phenomenon could generate localized areas of extreme pressure and suction, capable of pulling down large objects. The silence would be explained by the fact that these are primarily subsurface phenomena, with minimal surface disturbance, until the critical moment of collapse. While these scientific hypotheses offer plausible explanations for the physical effects observed, the silent calm, the inexplicable swells, the downward pull, and the crushing compression, they still struggle to fully account for the sheer scale of the event and the complete, instantaneous vanishing of 13 ships without conventional wreckage. Perhaps the true answer lies in a confluence of these rare phenomena, or perhaps, as the ancient chroniclers whispered, the Cantabrian Sea holds secrets that defy even our most advanced scientific understanding, reminding us that the abyss, in its vastness, still operates by its own terrifying rules. The human mind, confronted with the inexplicable, often seeks to categorize and understand. When natural phenomena fail to provide a complete answer, the psychological and sociological dimensions of fear, belief, and collective experience come into play. The vanishing of the Cantabrian Armada, a mystery shrouded in an unnerving silence, provided fertile ground for the birth and perpetuation of profound psychological effects on the communities that witnessed or inherited its chilling tale. One primary psychological root of the enduring Kraken myth, particularly in the context of the Cantabrian incident, is pareidolia, the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. When the sea's surface began to swell in vast, oily domes, reflecting the bruised sky, the human mind, grappling with the profound abnormality, would instinctively seek familiar forms. The breathing mountain beneath the waves, the silent maw forming in the water, could be the subconscious interpretation of geological or hydrological phenomena as a living, monstrous entity. The sheer scale of the event would overwhelm rational thought, pushing witnesses towards a primal, archetypal fear of the colossal and unknown. Furthermore, mass hysteria, or collective delusion, could have played a role in shaping the narratives passed down through generations. While the initial event was undeniably real, 13 ships did vanish, the interpretation of how and why could have been colored by shared fear and existing folklore. The isolated nature of the coastal communities, their lives intrinsically linked to the sea's unpredictable moods, fostered a rich tradition of sea monsters and vengeful spirits. The sudden, silent disappearance of a powerful armada would perfectly slot into these existing narratives, reinforcing the belief in an active, malevolent, or at least territorial entity in the deep. Survivors' accounts, if any existed or were later fabricated, would be filtered through this lens of pre-existing belief, embellishing the scientific reality with the terrifying details of a conscious, consuming monster. The concept of the Linia Altaqua also taps into deep-seated territorial anxieties and the psychology of transgression. Throughout human history, boundaries, be they physical, social, or spiritual, have held immense significance. Crossing a forbidden line, whether knowingly or unknowingly, often carries the implicit threat of retribution. For maritime cultures, the sea was not a uniform expanse. It was segmented by known and unknown dangers, by sacred and profane zones. The idea that the Armada had violated an ancient, invisible boundary speaks to a fundamental human fear of overstepping one's bounds, of provoking a force greater than oneself. This psychological root transforms the incident from a mere accident into a moralistic tale, a warning against hubris and disrespect for the natural or supernatural order. Finally, the trauma of the unknown is a powerful psychological driver. Unlike a shipwreck, where debris and bodies provide a grim closure, the complete vanishing of the Armada left a void. This absence of evidence, this absolute mystery, is often more terrifying than a clear disaster. The human mind abhors a vacuum. It will fill it with the most terrifying possibilities. The absorption by a deep root or a black tide becomes the ultimate manifestation of this primal fear, to be consumed entirely, leaving no trace, no memory, no story to be told. This existential dread, passed down through generations, ensures that the Cantabrian Armada remains not just a historical anomaly, but a chilling psychological testament to humanity's profound vulnerability in the face of the ocean's most unfathomable secrets. The sea, in this context, becomes a mirror reflecting our deepest, most ancient fears of oblivion. The tapestry of the Cantabrian Armada's disappearance is woven with threads of historical fact, scientific speculation, and the deep, enduring myths of the sea. To truly understand this chilling event, we must look beyond a single explanation and consider the confluence of factors that might have converged on that fateful day in 1498. The historical context of exploration and expanding maritime power, the geological peculiarities of the Cantabrian Trough, and the profound psychological impact of the unknown all contribute to the enduring legacy of the Linia Altaqua. Historically, the late 15th century was an era of burgeoning naval ambition for Spain. Fresh from the Reconquista, with a unified crown and a hunger for global dominion, Castilian fleets were pushing the boundaries of known waters. The Royal Armada, in its strength and numbers, represented this new era of confidence. It is plausible that in their quest for efficiency or new patrol routes, they ventured into waters less familiar, perhaps even intentionally crossing areas traditionally avoided by local, more superstitious mariners. The very hubris of an invincible armada might have led them to disregard the subtle warnings of the sea, the unnatural calm, the strange smells that older, more attuned sailors might have heeded. This cultural arrogance, the belief in human mastery over nature, could be seen as the historical root that led them to the precipice of the abyss. Geologically, the Cantabrian Sea is anything but uniform. While not as volcanically active as other regions, it is a complex basin with deep trenches, submarine canyons, and a history of seismic activity. The hypothesis of massive methane hydrate dissociation remains a potent scientific explanation for the physical characteristics of the event. The sudden, catastrophic release of methane gas from deep-sea clathrates could indeed create a vast, transient void, drawing down ships with incredible force and subjecting them to immense hydrostatic pressure, explaining the compressed wreckage. Such an event would be swift, silent, and leave little conventional trace on the surface after the gas dispersed. The dull thud could be the sound of the water column collapsing back into the void created by the escaping gas, a sound that would transmit through the seabed and water, far beyond the immediate vicinity. Biologically, the concept of a kraken or a deep root in the Cantabrian takes on a new dimension when considering extreme gigantism in marine life. While a creature vast enough to encompass 13 ships strains credulity, the discovery of colossal, previously unknown deep-sea organisms continues to challenge our understanding of what the ocean can conceal. Could a highly evolved, perhaps sessile or slow-moving organism, adapted to the unique pressures and energy sources of the deep, exhibit characteristics that mimic geological events? If such a creature existed, its immense mass and biological processes could generate localized pressure changes, attracting and then consuming the ships. The oily swells could be secretions or even biological waste from such an organism. Psychologically, the enduring power of the legend stems from the profound human need to explain the inexplicable, the lack of a rational, tangible cause for such a complete vanishing, combined with pre-existing folklore of vengeful sea entities and forbidden zones, would naturally lead to the creation and perpetuation of a narrative centered on a monstrous, consuming entity. The Linia Altaqua becomes the symbolic representation of this boundary between the known and the terrifyingly unknown, a line that, once crossed, invited an ancient, indifferent power to reclaim its territory. The fate of the Royal Armada of Castile, therefore, is likely a chilling mosaic, a blend of human overconfidence, pushing into unfamiliar, potentially hazardous waters. A catastrophic, yet rare, natural geological event involving immense gas release or an unprecedented internal wave, and the subsequent interpretation of these terrifying phenomena through the lens of deep-seated cultural myths and primal fears of the abyss. The Cantabrian Sea, in its silent depths, still holds this terrifying memory, a testament to the fact that some parts of our world are not meant to be charted, not meant to be crossed, unless the ancient guardians of the abyss grant their silent, chilling permission. The mystery endures because it touches upon our deepest fears, to be swallowed whole without a trace by something vast and utterly indifferent to our existence. So what then truly devoured the Royal Armada of Castile? Was it a beast, a geological cataclysm, or a manifestation of ancient fear? Perhaps it was all, and none of these. The deeper we dive into the dusty archives, the more we speak to those who still remember the whispers, the more the lines blur between the tangible and the terrifyingly unknown. The Cantabrian incident stands unique in the chilling annals of maritime mystery because it speaks not of a familiar tooth and claw attack, but of an absorption, a reclaiming. There were no splintered masts strewn for leagues, no cries of battle against a visible foe, no desperate attempts at escape, only the silence and then the void. Imagine the sea, not as a passive medium, but as a vast ancient consciousness, one that has slumbered for eons, its territory marked not by human charts, but by its very being, its primordial boundaries defined by an innate, colossal will. The Linia Altaqua then becomes less a line on a forgotten map and more a living membrane, the subtle, almost imperceptible skin of a colossal, breathing world beneath the waves. The Armada, in its confident, unwitting passage, simply sailed over this membrane, an accidental trespass into a sacred, primordial space. Dr. Emilia Navarro, a leading expert in marine archaeomythology, in her recent lecture series at the University of Lisbon, described it chillingly. The Cantabrian event was the sea itself yawning, and the ships were merely motes of dust drawn into that colossal exhalation, then swallowed by the subsequent silent inhalation. It wasn't malice, it was indifference on a scale we cannot fathom. The ocean simply reasserted its ancient right over its own domain. This reassertion left behind a chilling signature, wreckage so compressed it defied conventional explanation. Not shattered by impact, but squeezed, folded, as if by unimaginable pressure. The bronze fittings, salvaged from the deep, were found bent and contorted as if they were soft clay, speaking of a force that treats solid oak and metal as mere playthings. This is the hallmark of hydrostatic pressure, yes, but amplified, localized, and applied with an almost surgical precision that hints at something more profound than a random geological event. The dull thud that echoed across the water that day was not the sound of collision or explosion. It was the sound of a great living mouth closing. The Cantabrian kraken, the Marea Negra, is not a beast that hunts. It is a territory that consumes. It is the very earth breathing, the sea reclaiming, and the ultimate terrifying embodiment of the abyss's ancient right to swallow all that dares to trespass on its forgotten, sacred domains. And for centuries, the fishermen of that coast have known this truth, choosing to sail wide around those invisible coordinates, a silent, humble acknowledgement of a power that dwarfs all human ambition. The sea remembers, and sometimes it reminds us of its ancient, terrifying sovereignty. The fate of the Royal Armada of Castile, 13 proud ships swallowed by a placid sea, remains one of the most chilling enigmas in maritime history. It is a story that speaks not of shipwreck, but of absorption, not of a battle, but of a silent, profound reclaiming. We have journeyed through the unsettling historical records, felt the phantom thrumming of the deep through scientific hypothesis, and peered into the ancient primal fears that still haunt the Cantabrian coast. Was it a catastrophic release of methane hydrates? A geological exhalation that created a transient, colossal maw in the ocean's surface? Was it an unprecedented rogue internal wave, a silent tsunami of the depths that pulled the Armada into an inescapable vortex of pressure? Or was it, as the ancient chroniclers and the whispered folklore of the Basques suggest, the awakening of the Marea Negra, a living colossal entity whose very being is the seabed itself, and whose Linia Altaqua marks the boundary of its primordial, indifferent domain? Perhaps the truth is a terrifying confluence of all these things, a moment where geological instability, driven by forces beyond our comprehension, converged with the ancient, almost biological consciousness of the deep. The Royal Armada, in its human ambition, may have simply sailed over the breathing lung of an entity so vast, so ancient, that it perceived their fleet not as an invasion, but as a minor irritation, a fleeting presence to be silently, effortlessly drawn into its colossal being. The compressed wreckage, the sudden absolute silence, the absence of conventional debris. These are the chilling signatures of a power that dwarfs all human understanding, a power that sees the mightiest ships as mere dust motes to be swallowed without a ripple. The abyss holds secrets far older than humanity, vast intelligences and forces that operate on scales we can barely conceive. The Cantabrian incident stands as a stark, enduring reminder that even in an age of science and exploration, there are still parts of our world that belong to something else, something primal and untamed, waiting in the silence. What do you believe truly happened to the Royal Armada of Castile? Was it a monster, a natural phenomenon, or something far more profound? Share your thoughts, your theories, or any other chilling maritime mysteries that haunt your imagination in the comments below. And if the call of the deep resonates within you, if the whispers of forgotten horrors stir your soul, then join our voyage into the unknown. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and help us continue to brave the uncharted waters of history. Until next time, remember, the sea keeps its own counsel, and its depths are vast, cold, and eternally hungry.